So yeah, my name's Dion-Marie White, and I some of you may know my story, part of it, from the Inspiring Leadership Program, where we partnered with the Jamaican Baptist Union. I spent some time over there working in the community, just trying to work out my purpose and ministry and what that kind of looked like for me and for them as well. It also helped that my family is from Jamaica, so that was an amazing experience in itself, and it just felt like home away from home. So yeah, I'm here to talk with the amazing Revd Hayley, and hopefully everything that is shared, everything that is said, is going to help you and bless you, and something that you can take away and pray about and hopefully act upon as well.
Cool, thank you. So what do you do now? What's your kind of role and your job?
Okay, so my main role is a youth worker, which I've been doing for some time with a company called the Hebe Foundation. So we've worked with young people for 12 years now. I believe the company has been around, and I was with them from when I was 14. I'm now 25. So I was a young person, and I kind of just grew up interested in the whole youth work aspect of it, what it meant to be a youth leader. So that's my main job, but I also have loads of experience working with children with special needs as a one-to-one support carer. I'm still in contact with families that I've worked with before, but because of time constraints, I haven't been able to do that as much. What else? Yeah, that's my main thing really, but anything to do with youth leadership, you'll probably catch me about somewhere.
That's great, and you've got so much to give and offer us as a Baptist family, which I'd love to explore with you on another day. But right now, I want us to focus on the Black Lives Matter and what that means for us as church, especially as a majority white church leadership. Can you just explain your experience of Baptist churches and what that's been like?
I think in terms of growing up is something I've been in for a very long time, more or less since I was really small. I'm quite blessed in that I've experienced different denominations, or like a mixture of Baptist, Pentecostal. Although my church is mainly Baptist, we've had different ministers growing up, or I've gone to different churches, I've gone to different retreats, because even though I know that, Baptist is a whole thing in itself, I believe that the body of Christ is a lot bigger than just us as Baptists. So I think it was important for me growing up to understand that and to get a wider picture of what the body of Christ actually looks like, if that makes sense. So my experience has been quite diverse. I don't think I've necessarily had any mindset of like, a racism thing or anything like that. But that's not to say that I haven't been in certain churches or congregations where it's very obvious that I might be one of the few Black people. Or, I'm of mixed heritage, but just the way that I've been brought up, I'm very aware of the Black culture. But I think more recently, as I've got older, there is definitely a more obvious systematic thing going on in terms of like a hierarchy of older white males. And I did, if possible, want to speak about the video from Spurgeon's, which I found very interesting on the whole matter, but we can get into that after.
Yeah, let's do that. So with Black Lives Matter, it's a movement that's been around for several years, and has gained momentum. Actually, the past several years, I think they've been quite strong, but they've not necessarily been on white people's radar. So can you just explain, from what you know, of what Black Lives Matter is as a movement and why it's important?
I think it's just for me, my personal experience, especially the last couple of weeks, I feel like it's been a catalyst of just years and years of just racism and discrimination in general. And I think it's all hit ahead now, because obviously we were all kind of faced with the reality of it, with George Floyd's death. And I think we just got to a point, well, for me, and I know lots of others, where we were just tired. We were just tired of seeing stuff like that and knowing that stuff exists. And as horrible as it was, I think we're all kind of like, okay, as much as this was not a nice thing, and I know we wish it didn't happen, at least we like to think the world can no longer be blind. We don't just moan that these things happen, we don't just scream Bruce brutality because we're bored. Like, this stuff actually happens in real life. On a day-to-day, it is happening. So I think it's brought to light a comfortability that we've been living in, basically. And even myself, knowing, my mum's told me loads about my history. She's worked with racial justice stuff. Some of you may know her name's Pat White. But I think it wasn't until recently I even started to say enough is enough. I think I've been comfortable in accepting things as they are, and I'm kind of tired, because even reflecting on past experiences, I actually find very traumatic now to think about. But I lived it, I went through it, and some of it was upsetting during the time, but I was young and naive and wanted to believe that everybody was loving, and that, just to be forgiven and to kind of get on with life and not, hold people accountable for their actions.
Thank you. And obviously part of our awareness now, this has been happening for years. This is not a new thing, as you say, but we're aware. Our eyes have been opened. And in part of that awareness, some people are now saying, well, all lives matter. Why is it really important that we don't use that language, but use the language of Black Lives Matter?
I think it's important because I think what people have a tendency to do and have done with the whole all lives matter thing is they're basically taking away from what we've actually said. Like, we did not say all lives didn't matter. That's ridiculous. But we're just basically saying that in a lot of circumstances on a day-to-day, whether we want to accept it or not, it's the reality. Black people are still at the bottom. We're still oppressed, and it all is to do with, I don't want to be the person to be like, oh, it's all to do with slavery, because it's not just that, but it all stems from that partially. And there's things before that, as Black people, that doesn't really get recognized unless you've read your books and you've done your research. And so it wasn't even always like this. But I think psychologically, for everybody, white people, Black people, everyone, we do have these kind of prejudices that have been so ingrained that it's very easy for us, like I said earlier, to get comfortable in it. And sometimes we have to be faced with something as drastic, as awful, as seeing somebody basically get murdered in front of us, for us to start to unpack and start to ask ourselves why we think the way we think and why we've continued to behave the way that we have been.
Thank you. And you may not want to get into this because I know it's a bit political, but with the statues at the moment, that seems to be quite a big thing. In Cardiff, where I live, it's about 45 minutes to Bristol. And I think everyone knows that the removal of the statue in Bristol was a good thing. I've not encountered someone who hasn't. But what does it mean for you to have these statues that have this horrific past and abuse for Black people around our country?
I think it's just a statement from everybody that we don't want to be stuck with the mentality of those that went before us, so the slave owners, etc. Because what is the point of having them there in a way of like, we're supposed to be reverent to them, we're supposed to respect their legacy, but what is their legacy? Do you know what I mean? It's not something that I think should be celebrated. I'm not saying I agree with the way that people have necessarily gone about doing these things, but for the fact that the point has been heard and the councils are starting to move it down, kind of says well, obviously it was meant to come down in the first place. I know some people might disagree with me on that point, but I feel like sometimes you have to just go with your gut and do what you need to do, and people will start paying attention. But that's not me advocating for those things, but sometimes it's just the way things have to happen. You know, Jesus had to flip over tables to make his point known.
Absolutely. And so what is it like for you? You said about the systematic racism. It's really hard for me to understand that. How would you explain that to white people?
How do I explain systematic racism? Wow. I think if I try to put it simply, I know it's a lot wider than this, but for most things, if you look now at any company, any organization, everything starts from the top down. And if the top positions are all filled with white, mostly males, but some females, of the older generation, and it trickles down the same until you get to the very bottom, and then there might be someone black or from another ethnicity, then I think that's a clear indication of the way things are run and their mentality. Like, why is it that there is no black people in the high positions, or why is it that there isn't fair representation? Like, what does that tell you? You know, if this wasn't a race issue and you was just given that scenario, what would you think? You know, if it was reversed and white people didn't have any top positions and they just had all the bottom positions, like, how would you feel? What would you think? You know, and maybe that's something to think about. I don't know if that answers the question. But yeah, I think that's the simplest way I can kind of put it. And I think it's also to do with the fact that whoever is in charge, those people that are at the top, they tend to have a similar mindset or a similar way to see things, or a similar way that they view themselves as being more superior or better than other people. And once you have that mindset, then everyone else kind of wants to follow after you. And like I said, I think for loads of people, they're not fully conscious of their bias. They're not fully conscious of the systems that they have been, you know, brought up in. Someone shared recently that people can only share from their experience. So if you grew up, there's a white person grew up in a white neighborhood, they've never seen a black person before, and all their teachers were white, the people that they worked with were white, everyone was white, and then they suddenly had a black teacher, for example, they wouldn't necessarily know how to react to that. They wouldn't necessarily know, I mean, their intrigue might cause them to say or do things that come across as racist to a black person. And it doesn't take away from the fact that it is racist. It just shows that they haven't been introduced to that way of thinking or seeing life before. And when I heard that, yeah, I did find it a little bit difficult, because I was like, yeah, but that's not an excuse. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it did humble me in a sense that we're all dealing with our own prejudice. We're all dealing with what we've been brought up into, our experience, and it's about unlearning that regardless of your race.
Thank you. And I think for my role as a regional minister, I look around, I'm often the youngest in the room, or the only female, and I'm constantly battering down saying we need more female in leadership, because it's about role models. We need more millennials and young adults, and in that sense it's similar. It's not the same, but it's similar as in who you see. Now, one of the biggest things that struck me over the past couple of weeks is, as a white person, what do I say? I know racism is wrong. I've had to acknowledge the fact that I'm probably not overtly racist, but when I walk into a room, I don't think, why does everyone only look like me? And I've not used that opportunity to highlight the error of that ways. But equally, I've not known what to say that doesn't sound patronising or just tokenistic. So how do you kind of advise us to just speak? What do we do to help the cause of Black Lives Matter?
I think it's just a matter of being yourself and not being afraid. And even if you are afraid, stepping out in faith anyway. I know for me, I actually was looking at some old pictures this morning. It was my friend's birthday, and I found some pictures of when I was in school, and it was a majority. I can't even say the word. Majority.
It's early on a Saturday morning. Majority.
Yeah, that word. White people, and in the picture I was the only Black person. I remember that day. It was someone's birthday, and all I saw was chocolate cake. And even though I was not invited to this little circle of friends celebrating, I just thought I want a piece of chocolate cake. So I went over and I said, "Happy birthday. That cake looks amazing." And the girl was kind enough to share her cake with me. And I sat there, took a picture with all of them. And I reflect back and I just thought a lot of these people had been racist to me. But in that moment, all I cared about was the chocolate cake. And maybe we need to have that approach just in life and not necessarily look at people and think, they've done this to me, or this is going to be awkward because, do you know what I mean? They might think this, X, Y, Z. Just see each other as people and friends and family where we connect on some level, whether it's the chocolate cake or not. There's going to be something that connects us. And the only thing that is separating that conversation or that connection is literally just walking over and saying hi, or saying, "I like that top," or whatever it is. It might seem very small and ridiculous, but in the end, you'll get your chocolate cake and you'll be happy.
I think that's it. And my experience has been actually it's finding common ground and being willing to be called out. I think we as people are not happy being called out sometimes on our behaviour, but we need to be.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, in church life, a lot of churches have got a white male leadership.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for you, kind of, when you look at church leadership? What does that kind of symbolise and say to you?
It's a question I've never really thought about because my experiences have been so diverse. I've never looked at it in a negative way or in a way that's made me really question, other than when I can only talk about my experience in my church, when the differences between when we had a white pastor. There was just this weird, I don't know how to explain it. It was weird, sudden reverence, and not that they weren't reverent to everyone, including, Black ministers, and it's interesting because my church is I'm going to say mainly elderly Black congregation. But again, this is what I was saying about we all have our own systematic stuff that we've been brought up in. This sudden reverence to him, like anything he said, even when it was wrong, when it was challenged back and in quite a rude way. And the majority would kind of shun the person who challenged him. And that was very difficult for me to see and observe. Because I just didn't understand it. I just thought, why? Like, what makes him so special that he can get away with the things that he's saying and doing, or we have to pander to everything he says, other than the fact that he's white? And there is this psychological thing that we do as we're told when certain figures are in authority, and we don't answer back and we don't challenge because we're going to be seen as not submissive isn't the right word, but rude or disrespectful. And even that in itself, as much as I don't like to say it, is part of the legacy of slavery, because we was taught to obey our master, whoever that is, and subconsciously sometimes, if it's a white person, then we kind of end up doing the same thing. I even was reflecting on George Floyd, the way that he was so respectful to the officer. I mean, that's a beautiful legacy for him to have. But part of me does wonder and think the reason why he continued to be so polite is because it was ingrained in him that regardless, you show respect and you don't question authority, even when they're literally taking your breath away. You still don't challenge enough. And I'm not saying that he had to be disrespectful at all, but whether if he decided to stop calling him sir, nobody was gonna ridicule him for that. His legacy wasn't going to be tarnished because he decided in his head that this man doesn't deserve the respect of me calling him sir, even in like my final. Yeah, I hope what I said makes sense, but
it does, and it's tough. It's tough to hear, but we need to hear it because that's true. So how can I make sure, help, aid this not happening in churches?
I think when it comes to churches, especially leadership, there needs to be an understanding of each individual congregation, for sure, in a sense of, you know, where they're coming from, their background, but also not coming with a heart of like feeling like you have to assert your authority. Like it should be a given that you are there to serve and to lead, that people would naturally want to give you respect, not that you feel like you have to earn it or that you feel like you have to assert it. Because it's not about you at the end of the day saying or going home and feeling like, you know, my congregation was obedient today and, you know, what a wonderful service, nobody complained. Or it was very quiet, you know, people weren't being over the top and singing extra loud. Like, that's ridiculous. It should be about, was the spirit felt today in church? Did, you know, were we loving each other? Were we listening to each other? And were we serving each other? I feel like even as a leader, your main role is to serve, not to be served.
That's brilliant, thank you. And how does it make you feel? The Baptist Union, myself included, have kind of wrote statements following the death of George Floyd, and kind of we want to respond. Some of that response has been positive, some hasn't. Do you want to just talk through how you feel about those responses and what it means to you?
I think for the most part, it was good to see how many people came together, how many people had wanted to share their opinion, their view, to stand in solidarity with us. Like that was beautiful to see. And honestly, for me, it meant a lot. It was sad to see that there was some opposition or some negativity. And I can only pray for those individuals because, like I said, as much as they should be accountable for the way that they act or respond to these things, some of it, like I said, is coming from a place that, or a bias, an unconscious bias that they haven't yet been able to sit down and work through. So in that respect, I have some compassion for them. I think the one I struggled with the most, as I kind of mentioned earlier, and you can share your opinion, I'd love to hear someone else's opinion on it, was the message from Spurgeon, because as much as at one point Black Lives Matter was mentioned, it completely went over my head because the whole way through, all I heard was all lives matter and a whole heap of Christian jargon that wasn't incorrect. Like I've been quoting those scriptures too, and I've had to reflect on some of them to remind myself about the way I respond and the way that I deal with this. There's been times I've had to go to God and cry about how angry I am, because I don't want to, you know, take my anger out on anyone. But I just felt like it was a little bit of a cop-out, and it kind of just went around the issue, and it took a long time to get to the point, which, you know, was the main point. And there just seemed to be this emphasis on all students this and all this and all that. And like I said, a very small like tiptoe around the subject. And that kind of bothered me a little bit, because I was just like, but why we? And I think even the last bit at the end, and the only reason the last bit got to me is because I've experienced it at, you know, university, college, was, you know, oh, if if any of our students are feeling overwhelmed by this, go and talk to your pastoral team. Okay, that's one thing. But how many people in the pastoral team can they feel like they can relate to talk about it? Because if the pastoral team is mainly white, then let's say a black student that's feeling overwhelmed is very unlikely wanting to go to them to talk about how traumatizing this whole week, month, whatever has been for them, because it is very traumatizing for a lot of people, and that would be my main thing. You can't just brush it with, oh, go to your pastor or whoever, if there's not things in place. Like I said, I don't really know because I'm not there, but I just feel like that it should have been addressed a lot clearer and a lot more to the matter, which is all like that. Black Lives Matter, and obviously all lives matter, but we already know that. I think
you're right, and I think it's really difficult, because when I wrote a statement, you get drawn as a white person into well, all lives matter, and basically what we're doing is trying to defend our ignorance and trying to rationale times when we've not spoken out. And I think I can be guilty of that as a white person. But I think the switch for me has really been, actually, Black lives do matter, because it's about how we treat people in society. And if we say Black lives are the same as all other lives, what we're doing is we're whitewashing, forgive the term, the cause, the hurt, the pain. And actually, when Black lives truly do matter and are integral in our society and our systems and our structures, then as a default, all lives will matter.
Yeah.
About standing by those vulnerable. And I may have used clumsy language there, I may have got it wrong, but that's kind of how I'm learning to confront my own cultural bias.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would kind of recommend, or that we read, watch? I know someone said to me, well, Hayley, how do I educate myself? And I just went on Netflix and kind of went, watch this, read this. And is it as simple as exposing ourselves to those different things, or is there something more you would recommend?
There's always more. I think one thing I struggled with this week in particular was this notion of like, yeah, at first I was sharing information, books, films, like you said, there's loads of stuff on Netflix. But apart from the fact I felt like that wasn't enough, I kind of felt a bit annoyed that people didn't just do it for themselves. Like, it's not hard to Google. Like, a lot of this stuff that has been going on for years, with a quick Google search, yes, there are going to be sources that are biased and not correct 100%. But if you really cared to learn, you would. It's kind of that simple. Or get your friends together and ask them, like the same way you're asking me. And let's be intentional about it. Have a Netflix party if you want to with your friends. And that will probably be very challenging, I can imagine. But I think it can also be quite a beautiful moment, and definitely a point for discussion afterwards. How did you feel about that? How did you feel about that? There's so much that could come out of that I think could actually create healing. I'm not sure I would necessarily recommend watching a lot of the stuff by yourself, because it is a lot. And if you have no one to unpack those feelings with as well, it's kind of pointless. You might just, what was the point of watching it? Also, cognitive dissonance is a real thing. When we watch things that are too traumatic for us, or going against what we're so used to, that we don't actually understand or get the message. So that's very possible that could happen as well. We could throw all of this information, these books, these films, whatever it is, in people's faces, and it still goes over their heads because it's just too much for them to get. But in terms of more, I think it's a lot of self-development. You have to do self-reflection. I'm someone who likes to think self-reflection is something that I do regularly, but especially in times like this, take the time to sit by yourself with God, or just by yourself. God is always there regardless. And ask yourself why. Why do you feel this way? Why do you think this way? Where did it come from? if you think it's something your parents taught you, have that conversation with your parents. Ask them why they feel that way. They might even tell you they don't know, it's just what they were told, which in itself is a bit crazy, because okay, cool, you was told that, let's see what else there is for us to learn and to know about. I might even go as far to say go counseling if that's something you believe in, if that's something you're open to. I think that's also important, but again, you have to be careful who your counselor is and all of that stuff. And prayer, obviously prayer is always important, but I think as Christians we definitely have this thing of like, just go and pray about it or read your Bible. I mean, it's blown me away how much is in the Bible about injustice just in general, that we've gone through year after year after year, and we're still surprised about what's happening right now. We still have something negative to say about, like, it just blows my mind completely. Because it's like, was you really listening to the, or maybe what I realized is, or maybe they just needed another perspective to it. Like, Bible stories in particular can be told from different perspectives and still have the heart of Christ at the center of it and the same message that he's trying to get across. And so maybe that's a responsibility for all of us. How do we look at this passage that we've been taught about injustice from a Black perspective, from a white person's perspective? And you will, if you do it that way, you will see how what's the word I'm looking for? One, how amazing God is, and two, the differences. And then you'll start to unpack and question why are there these differences, and what is the similarity? And the similarity should be God. The similarity should be that all lives matter. But yeah, we're getting rid of that phrase. God loves every single one of us, and he made us in his image at the end of the day, so that we can love and respect each other. Like, what is it to really love your neighbor? And if you don't love your neighbor, do you really love God? And how many times have we heard that, love God first and then love your neighbor, or love your neighbor as yourself? What does that actually mean to you? Because would you like to be treated the way that you're treating other people?
Yeah, I think you make such a profound point there, and it's something that, when I think, actually, I've been 13 years in ministry, and all the theology books I have read and use as my source are written by white men, and occasionally a white woman. So I've quickly gone online and just ordered a load of books about hermeneutics from a different perspective, because it's going to be natural, isn't it, in how we, without being conscious about it.
I think, just to add to that point, it's very interesting because I'm reflecting now. When I was at uni, we had a Black lecturer called Robert Beckford. Some of you may have heard of him, and I loved his classes because it just brought diversity to all my other lectures, and I found his classes quite dynamic. And I will never forget the day I actually got invited by one of my friends to lunch. So they normally would meet for lunch, and they'd actually discuss theology. So I was invited one day, and I thought, sorry, my voice is like disappearing. I thought this should be fun. And when I got there, the topic of conversation was how terrible his classes were, and how, it's being forced down our throats that, what is Black theology, and why are we being taught this? And, it's uncomfortable. And I was literally sitting there thinking, first of all, this is not what I came here for. I thought we came here to discuss theology and like increase our nerd game, it was just so weird. And, my friend and I had an interesting conversation separately afterwards, and, he was understanding of just how weird that experience was for me. But I remember, I think I ended up walking away, because there was every time I tried to explain or say to them, I understand that you may have felt uncomfortable, but his lessons aren't to make you as a white person feel segregated. That's ridiculous. Like, I'm the only Black person in the class. Like, how do you feel segregated? They teach us white theology every single day. But yeah, that was definitely met with, oh, you don't need to get aggressive. I mean, I literally said it the same way I just said it now, and if that's aggressive, I don't know what. I was just in shock and just passionate about like, how did this even become a conversation? Like, you actually went to lunch to discuss about how terrible lecture was, when on a normal day, if that wasn't the lecture, you'd probably be discussing whatever white theology you was taught and like all these extra big words that you probably still don't know the meaning of. Like, it was definitely an interesting experience, because there was just so much. Like I said, it wasn't shown in class. These comments were never shown in class. They were never shared. But I just thought to myself, wow, like, after class they actually go and talk about this. It was very uncomfortable. And I hope now that those people that I went to uni with are seeing what's happening in the world, and I hope their perspectives are changing, because the same way that they have the love for knowledge and you know, educating and sitting around talking about it, I hope they're doing the same now.
Thank you. And yeah, I think that's a challenge for us as local ministers, but I think there's a bigger challenge for our colleges, for our establishments, to actually not be so restricted in how they teach, and in that. And obviously I'm not attached to any college, so I can kind of just put that out there as a challenge. There's been so much in that, and I know we just almost scraped the surface of what the issues are. Is there anything else that you kind of think, actually, this is what you guys need to know as the church?
I just think we need to be open to challenge. I think that's the biggest thing. And challenge doesn't always have to have a negative connotation to it. I think I've always grown up with challenge being a good thing, you know. And when I was 16, I did something which was actually called the challenge, which I think now is being revamped into NCS, I think it's called.
Okay,
and the
I don't know what that is. What?
Oh, okay, so it's like a program that a lot of young people do when they're 16. It's for everyone, no matter your background. It's a thing. I think it's a UK thing rather than just a London thing, but I did it in London, and I think it was 3 weeks long. So we spent 1 week away in like some kind of accommodation with young people we've never met before. The second week we spent in a uni accommodation. This is when you're 16, so you've literally just finished school. And then the third week you go and like do rock climbing and abseiling and things like that. And it's all about teamwork, it's all about team building. And that experience really helped me to kind of meet other young people from different races, different ethnic backgrounds. One of them I'm very close to right now. She's white. Her name is Samantha. I love her to pieces. And yeah, I think just the name in itself, the challenge, because it challenged us in every way possible. I mean, any 16-year-old and you think you know everything, you really don't. And I think that's the experience that a lot of people that do that remember. You know, it's something you get told to put on your CV, but then you realize it doesn't really mean much in later years. But it's an experience you never forget. Like I said, it's been renamed NCS now. But that's always been the mindset for me. A challenge is always going to help you grow. It's never going to stunt your growth. It's always going to make you be a better version of yourself. So we shouldn't be afraid to challenge each other, to challenge our thought processes, to challenge our theologies, to challenge our leadership. Yep, I said that. Sorry, guys, if you don't agree with that. But I think you should be able to challenge your leadership and challenge yourself and allow yourself to be challenged by other people. One thing I always say to people is I'm open to any form of not necessarily criticism, but correction. And I may not agree with your correction. I might not like the way that you present it to me, but I have a choice. I can completely ignore it, or I can do something about it. And one thing I find, especially being a Christian, is that if it's something that God cares about and wants you to work on, he will remind you about it, and you'll be humbled, and you'll either have to go back and apologize to that person, or you will just make a change and that person will see it, and you will both have a mutual silent thing of like, I'm grateful that you corrected me. Or you could just be open and say, I'm really grateful that you brought me or corrected me on that thing, because yeah, I've been convicted. And you can always go and pray about it as well, and you can discern whether the person was saying something to genuinely like show you love and to help you be better, or if they were just being mean. But you should be able to discern that for yourself. And if you can't, then pray about it or talk to someone else about it in a loving way of, this is how I feel. I don't know if it was they were being mean or not, but I want to lovingly receive it or reject it.
Thank you. And I think, I would say, please don't apologize for challenging leaders. To become a good leader, you need to be challenged. And that, I find it as frustrating, as irritating being challenged as well, like you say, but you kind of go away and go, oh, actually, God says I've really got to deal with that. and your pride is slapped down. So thank you so much. And please do hold me accountable. I don't want this to end with this conversation. And I think, I need to be committed to making sure the life of our Baptist family changes in demographics. So please do call me out. If it just feels like words, say it. like just because something needs to change. And I think the most awful thing in this would be if it just becomes a hashtag. I'll remember when we did that. This needs to be a fundamental change.
Yeah, and just to quickly add to that, I think that's one important thing I want everyone to take away from this. Yes, there are going to be some people that are going to forget about this in a week's time, or they're going to be so glad that it's quietened down and people aren't talking about it. But please make no mistake that for people, especially Black people, that have lived this and are constantly challenged and being traumatized by constant reminders, for them it's every single day. And whether you forget or not, or you decide to ignore it or be grateful that it's kind of disappeared, it hasn't for us. And I hope and I pray that for myself and others, that we will continue to speak up and not get too tired of the fact that this is actually constant for us, and that it's a lot easier for white people. I know this is going to be very hard for some of you to listen to, but it's a lot easier for white people to turn off the switch. It's a lot easier for you to turn off your phone. It's a lot easier for you to just pretend that this doesn't exist and this is just a moment and this is just a hashtag. But this is our everyday life. Like, we can't get away from it. And if we try to run away from it, our families are going to be reminders, and our friends and everyone else that is hurting with us. So I hope that we stay united in this. And this doesn't mean, I put on my Instagram earlier, but when I go silent and when other Black people start to go silent, it doesn't mean that we're going to accept racism. It doesn't mean that we've accepted that this is a moment that's passed. It just means we're probably tired of opening our mouths when you can do the stuff yourself. But I just hope that when the time comes and when we're in the moment, we will continue to challenge other people to do better.
Thank you.